One morning in Baghdad, more than 900 years ago, the most celebrated teacher in the Islamic world climbs to his chair to speak and finds that he cannot. His name is Abu Hamid Al-Ghazali, and the hall in front of him is full. Several hundred students, the sons of judges and viziers, waiting for the voice they have travelled a long way to hear. He opens his mouth to begin, and nothing comes out. He tries again the next day, and the day after that, and each time it is the same. This is a man who could out-argue anyone alive, whose words were written down and carried to distant cities. And now he stands before his students with his mouth open and his mind gone still, while the silence in the room stretches until it is unbearable. Then he stops being able to eat. Food will not go down. Water will not go down. The physicians are sent for, and they look him over, and they find a body in good health and nothing they can put a name to. The trouble, they tell him, is not in the body at all. It is somewhere they cannot reach, in the heart. Nothing about this man would lead you to expect it. He held the most powerful teaching post in the Sunni world, the chair at the Nizamiya, the great college of Baghdad, and the rulers of the age came to sit near him and borrow a little of his certainty. Only months before, he had finished a book that set out to take apart the philosophers, the most formidable minds of the age, one argument at a time. People had begun to call him the proof of Islam, as though an entire religion could rest its case on a single mind. He was still only in his late 30s, and he had already climbed every step there was to climb, all the way up to the place where there is nowhere higher left to go. And there, at the top of it all, with the whole world leaning in to listen, the voice simply left him. What silences a man who has won every argument? That is the question this whole long night turns around, because Al-Ghazali knew exactly what was happening to him, and it frightened him more than any illness could. For months, he had been unable to shake a suspicion about himself, that all of it, the learning, the brilliance, the crowds, the nearness to power, had never really been for God, that it had been for him. He had made himself certain of 10,000 things and walked straight past the only one that could have borne his weight. How do you know what you actually know? Can a person be sure of anything at all? And this life you have built, brick by careful brick, is it the one you were meant to build, or only the one you never quite got around to leaving? Within a few months, he would give away most of what he owned, make provision for his family, and slip out of Baghdad without telling anyone where he was going. He would not stand before a public class again for 11 years. What he went looking for, in all that time, was a particular kind of quiet. Not the silence that had seized his tongue and frightened him half to death, but its opposite. A stillness he could choose, a mind swept clean enough to reflect something true, everything this restless, honest, unsatisfied mind ever worked out, about doubt, about God, about how a person is actually supposed to live, came out of that search. So did the quiet it gave up everything to find. You don't have to carry any of it tonight. It's late, and the questions that feel so heavy in daylight tend to loosen their grip here in the dark, where there is nothing to settle and nowhere you have to be. So let yourself get comfortable. Let your body grow heavy against whatever is holding it up. The mattress, the pillow, the dark. There is no hurry at all. We have hours, and we can take them as slowly as you like. And here is a small, strange thing to keep you company while you sink towards sleep. The quiet that Al-Ghazali spent the whole second half of his life trying to reach, you are already nearer to, right now, than he was for most of his. It is in the room with you. There is nothing here to win, only a life to sit beside for a while, until you drift off somewhere in the middle of it. If a piece made like this, quiet, unhurried, meant to be heard in the dark, feels worth keeping around, subscribing is the thing that helps most. And before we begin, one question to hold loosely as you go under. Is there something you are sure of, all the way down, that you have never once let yourself doubt? You don't have to answer it. You only have to let it sit there in the dark with you. We start where he started, far to the east and 900 years ago, in a poor house in a town called Toos, where a dying father is about to leave behind two small sons, a little money, and a single wish for what should become of them. His father's hands were rough and quick, and stained dark from the work. Day after day, they pulled raw wool into thread, twisting and feeding and winding it in a cramped workshop in Toos, the dusty town in the far east of the Persian world where the family lived. He was a poor man, and he could not read. What cloth he made he carried to market on his own shoulder, and the learned men of the city, the ones who sat in the mosque and argued about God and the law, he loved from a distance, the way you might love a language you know you will never learn to speak. What he wanted, more than comfort or a longer life, was that his two small sons would grow into the scholars he had never been allowed to become. The elder of those boys was named Abu Hamid Al-Ghazali. He would climb further than almost anyone born into a house like that had any right to climb. But he began here, in the wool dust, watching a father who could not spell his own name reach toward a world of books. The father did not live to see where it led. He died while both sons were still small, and the story that comes down to us is that he left everything he owned, which was next to nothing, with a friend who followed the Sufi path, one instruction attached to it: use this to have them taught. The money soon ran out. When it did, the friend could no longer feed the boys, so he did the one thing he could think of and placed them in a religious college where students were given bread and a bed along with their lessons. It is a small and telling detail worth sitting with for a moment. Al-Ghazali came to the life of the mind at the start, partly because it was where the food was. The younger brother, Ahmad, would drift time toward the wandering, ecstatic edge of religion and become a mystic. The elder went straight for the lecture hall. It is almost as if the father's two hopes had divided between his two sons. The elder turned out to be the kind of student teachers remember for the rest of their lives. Learning came to him quickly and stayed, and the boy who had arrived for the bread stayed for the ideas. He studied in Toos, and then, still young, he went as far as Jurjan, a city near the Caspian shore, to sit with a well-known teacher there. By then, his fortune was his notes, the thick stack of pages onto which he had copied everything he had heard. In a world with no printing, such a stack was a painstaking thing, every line taken down by hand from a teacher's dictation, sometimes over years, and it held all he had travelled so far to gather. He carried it home the way another young man might carry a purse of gold, and on the road back it was taken from him. A band of highwaymen stopped the caravan and stripped the travellers of anything worth carrying, and among the bundles they hauled off were Al-Ghazali's notebooks. He went after them. He found their leader and pleaded with him for the papers, which, he said, could be of no earthly use to a robber. The man only laughed. What kind of learned man was he, the robber asked, if his learning could be lifted out of his baggage by pulling a few sheets from a saddlebag? Take away the notes, and what exactly was left? The words landed hard because they were true, and Al-Ghazali never forgot them. He said, long afterward, that God had put that taunt in the thief's mouth to wake him. He spent the next 3 years making certain it could never happen again, not by guarding the paper more closely, but by driving the knowledge so far down into himself that no thief on any road could reach it. Beneath the lesson about memory lay a deeper one that would sit near the centre of everything he later became, that there is a difference between the knowledge you carry and the knowledge you have turned into, and that only the second kind is ever really yours. When he was ready for the finest teacher of the age, he went and found him. In Nishapur, a city of scholars a few days' ride from home, there taught a man named Al-Juwayni. Al-Juwayni, whom his students called the Imam of the Two Sanctuaries, and who was, by wide agreement, the sharpest theologian then living. Al-Ghazali became his star pupil. He was still in his 20s and already writing books of his own that older, established men felt they had to answer. He swallowed whole the craft his teacher had spent a lifetime perfecting, the art they called kalam, the defense of religious truth by pure reasoning, faith argued out like a case in a court. And then he began to build with it on his own, faster and more boldly than the older man entirely liked. There is a sense, in the accounts that survive, that Al-Juwayni watched his most gifted student with pride and unease mixed together, the way a person watches a fire they have lit and are no longer certain they can keep in the grate. While the master lived, the pupil stayed more or less within his shadow. When Al-Juwayni died, the shadow lifted and the young man walked out into the open. What waited for him there was a world almost purpose-built for someone brilliant, poor, and starving to be seen. It was an age that settled its great questions out loud, in formal debate. A patron would sit on his cushion at the head of a crowded courtyard. Two scholars would face each other and trade thrusts of argument while the room leaned in and murmured, and everyone present understood that a reputation could be made or unmade before the evening lamps were lit. Al-Ghazali was magnificent at it. He won and kept winning, and each victory carried him a little nearer to the seats of power. Stand where he stood for a moment. You are the poorest young man in the room, in a borrowed robe that does not quite hang right, ringed by boys whose fathers held office and owned land, and who have never once wondered where a meal was coming from. You have exactly one thing none of them can buy. You are quicker than all of them, and the whole room is about to find it out. Can you feel how badly you would want to win? Not for the truth of the matter, but to be looked at, to make the men who would never have seated you at their table lean forward and pay attention. That wanting is not a fine or a holy thing, and Al-Ghazali knew that it was not, and it drove him like an engine for years. This is what he confessed, without mercy toward himself, when he was older and turning back to look at the young man he had been, that he had done almost none of it for God, or even for the truth. He had done it to be first. He wanted the admiration and the rank and the sound of his own name in other people's mouths. The hunger his father had blessed him with, the hunger to know, had grown up braided together with a second hunger the father never meant to give him, the hunger to be known. And for a long time, Al-Ghazali could not tell the two of them apart. It is tempting to draw a straight line from the wool workshop to the man he turned into, to say the poverty made him hungry, that the stolen notebooks taught him to want a knowledge nobody could steal, that the fatherless boy spent his life hunting for something solid enough to stand on. Tempting and maybe true. But it is only honest to admit that this is the oldest move there is in the telling of a life. We already know how the story ends, so we reach back and lift out the moments that seem to point that way, and quietly pass over the thousands of poor, clever, fatherless boys who spun wool in towns like Tuss and left no mark on anything at all. Maybe the childhood made the man, or maybe it explains almost nothing, and we simply cannot stand to meet a great mind without first being shown where it came from. There is no knowing which. What can be said for certain is that the hunger was real, whatever it was that lit it, and that it was about to carry him all the way to the top of the world. None of that has happened yet, though, for now he is only a young man on the rise, riding toward the largest doors in the world with his notes memorized and his ambition burning clean and bright, certain he is chasing exactly the right thing. And you, notice as you lie here that your own hands have gone quiet, that whatever you were still holding on to earlier in the day, you have mostly let go of it by now. He had not learned that yet. It would cost him nearly everything before he did. The stillness you are sinking into tonight was, for him, years away still, waiting on the far side of a breaking he could not yet imagine. So rest there a little while, out ahead of him. He is climbing. You are allowed to stop. By the time he was 35, Al-Ghazali had won. In the year 1091, he was called to Baghdad, the greatest city in the Muslim world, the seat of the caliph, the place every ambitious mind eventually turned toward, and handed the chair at its most famous college, the Nizamiyya. It was the highest teaching post in all of Sunni Islam, and men twice his age had spent their lives hoping for it without ever coming close. He walked into a hall filled with hundreds of the sharpest students of a generation, and he held every one of them. But the teaching was only part of it. He issued rulings on questions of law that bound courts across the region. He wrote at a pace that would have been the whole life's work of a lesser man. Books on law, on logic, on the foundations of belief. And they were devoured as fast as he could produce them. He was consulted on the affairs of the state itself, a religious authority whose blessing the men of power actively wanted. When Al-Ghazali spoke, it counted, in the mosque and in the palace both. By every measure the world around him knew how to take. He was complete, arrived, established, unassailable, and still young enough to expect decades more of it. The man who had lifted him there was Nizam al-Mulk, the vizier who effectively ran the Seljuk empire on behalf of its Turkish sultan and one of the most powerful human beings alive. The colleges he had built across the empire, the ones that carried his name, were an act of piety and also a kind of machinery, a way of training a loyal class of scholars, binding the learned men of Islam to the state, arming Sunni orthodoxy against the rival movements pressing in on it from the edges. To hold the chair at the Baghdad Nizamiyya was to stand a step away from the center of the world's power. But that center was not a safe place to stand. Barely a year after Al-Ghazali arrived, Nizam al-Mulk was stabbed to death on a road, almost certainly by an agent of one of those rival movements. Within weeks, the Sultan himself was dead, and the empire fell into a long and bloody argument over who would inherit it. The young professor had reached the summit of a mountain that was, it turned out, trembling. He had spent his whole life climbing toward the powerful, and now he was near enough to see them plainly. Frightened men, killing one another over chairs, none of them anywhere close to peace. And here is the strange part. He had everything. The poor boy from the wool workshop had climbed all the way to the top of the world and taken the best seat in it. And somewhere in those years, quietly, at first almost too quietly to notice, it all began to taste of ash. Sit in his place for a moment. You are 35 years old. You have the position, the income, the reputation, the crowded hall that falls silent the instant you clear your throat. You have won every argument you were ever going to win. And late at night, when the students have gone home and the lamps are out, you lie awake with a growing, sickening sense that none of it is feeding the part of you that is actually hungry, that you have climbed the whole mountain and arrived at the wrong summit. He began, in those years, to live two lives at once. In the daylight, there was the public man, commanding and certain, standing in the pulpit and the lecture hall, speaking about the love of God and the discipline of the soul with a fluency no one could match. And in the private hours, there was the other man, the one lying awake, listening to the daylight man with a cold and growing suspicion that the whole glorious performance was exactly that, a performance, and that the fluent voice praising God from the chair belonged to someone who was, underneath, chiefly in love with the sound of it. He was preaching a devotion he was no longer sure he felt. Every day the distance between the two men widened, and every day he stood up and delivered the same brilliant lecture and hated himself a little more for how good it was. None of this was something the world had done to him. It was in him, and he was too honest to look away from it. When he forced himself to sit still and ask the plain question, what was he really doing any of it for? The answer would not flatter him. Strip away the noble reasons, and what was left at the bottom was the same engine that had driven the poor boy in the debating courtyards. the craving to be admired, to be first, to hear his own name in the mouths of important men. But the most disorienting part, the part that left him no clean way out, was that he could not separate that craving from the real devotion he also genuinely felt. The love of God and the love of his own reflection had grown from a single root and wound together as they grew, until there was no cutting out the one without killing the other. He had reached a place where he could stand and speak beautifully about surrendering the self to God, and honestly not know whether the man saying it meant a single word of it, or was doing, one more time and better than anyone alive, the only thing he had ever really known how to do. He put the feeling, later, into an image people have carried for 900 years. He said he felt like a man standing on a crumbling bank of sand at the very lip of a fire, watching the ground beneath him drop away grain by grain. He could see what honesty was asking of him. It was asking him to walk away from the chair, the salary, the fame, the hundreds of students who leaned on him, the whole luminous life he had bled for. And for a long time, he simply could not make himself do it. Feel the size of what that would cost. You have poured the better part of your life and every advantage you own into becoming this one thing. Step down from the chair, and within a week, the hall that went quiet for you will be leaning toward whoever takes your place. Within a year, your name will have loosened its hold on people's memory, and you will be more or less no one again. The poor boy from the wool shop, only older, and without even the hunger that once made the poverty bearable. Every argument for staying was strong and sensible and true. And beneath all of them lay the one fact he could not argue his way around, that staying would slowly cost him the very soul he kept giving such beautiful lectures about. It would be easy to take his side too quickly here, and worth slowing down because there is a strong case on the other side, and honest people have made it for centuries. Ambition is not a sin. A gifted man teaching hundreds, nudging rulers toward being a little less cruel, steadying the faith of a whole civilization from the best chair in it. That is not a wasted life or a corrupt one. It is a life of rare usefulness, and most of us would be proud to have lived it. There is a sharper objection too, and it cuts close. A man who agonizes this much over the purity of his own heart is not obviously humble. He may be the proudest man in the room, so sure of his own specialness that ordinary success could never be enough for him. And a great many people in that empire would have given anything for his problem. Men were dying in the streets over the succession. Ordinary families were praying just to get through the year. A brilliant man, tormented by the impurity of his motives, from the safety of the finest chair in the world, is not an obvious figure to pity. He might simply be a man with the leisure to be sick about his soul because everything else in his life was already taken care of. That is probably not the whole truth of him, but it cannot be ruled out as part of it, and neither, in his most honest moments, could he. For tonight, leave the verdict where it belongs, unsettled. Notice instead the room you are lying in and how quiet it is. That quiet is something Al-Ghazali almost never had. His was a life of noise, the packed halls, the applause, the disputes, the constant low roar of his own ambition, and a person cannot hear himself think, let alone hear whatever lies underneath his thinking, in a room that loud. Part of what was happening to him was simply that the noise had begun, for the first time, to fail, and in the gaps between it, he was catching the sound of something he had been outrunning for years. You have the gift he lacked. It is already quiet where you are, and the ground he had always stood on, the solid platform of everything he was certain he knew about himself, about the world, about what a person can be sure of at all, was about to feel a great deal less solid beneath him. Rest for now. He had further to fall than he knew. There is a kind of thought that comes only in the dark and never in daylight. You have probably met it. You are lying awake later than you meant to be, and out of nowhere, a strange question arrives. How do you actually know that any of this is real? Not in a frightened way, just a cool, clear suspicion. You cannot prove right now that the room around you is really there. You cannot step outside your own mind to check it. Everything you are certain of from the inside, and some quiet part of you notices that a person dreaming feels exactly this sure. In the morning, the thought will look silly, and you will forget it. But for a moment, in the dark, the floor of the world goes thin, and you can feel how little is actually holding it up. That thin-floored feeling, which most of us shrug off and go back to sleep, Al-Ghazali could not shrug off. It caught him, and it would not let go, and for a while it nearly unmade him. He had spent his life becoming the most certain man in the world, certain about law, about God, about the structure of reality, and now he turned that ferocious, doubting intelligence back on the certainty itself and asked one simple, dangerous question of it. How much of what he believed did he actually know? And how much did he believe only because he had been raised to it? He saw, with a sinking clarity, that almost everything he held had come to him the second way, poured into him by parents and teachers when he was too young to weigh any of it, accepted out of habit and repetition rather than any proof he had tested for himself. The scholars had a word for belief held like that, on trust and inheritance rather than sight, taqlid, and Al-Ghazali decided he would not rest until he had dug beneath all of it and reached the thing no one had handed him, a knowledge so certain that nothing could shake it. Certainty so complete that if a man stood in front of him and turned a stone into gold before his eyes, he would sooner doubt his eyes than doubt the thing he knew. So he began, like a man testing the boards of a bridge before he trusts his weight to them, with the sources of his knowledge, to see which would hold. He started with the senses, because they seemed surest of all. What could be more certain than what you can see and touch? And the senses failed almost at once. Look up at a star. The eye reports a small silver point, a coin of light, when measurement insists it is an enormous globe, larger than the whole earth you are standing on. Watch a shadow on the ground. It looks perfectly still, and yet you know it moves the entire time, too slowly for the eye to catch. Push a straight stick halfway into water, and it bends before your eyes, though nothing has touched it. Over and over, the thing the senses swore to turned out to be false. If they could lie to him that confidently about small things, what was their word worth on anything larger? Something in him answered, "Fine, the senses are unreliable, but reason corrects them." It is reason, after all, that catches the eye's mistake about the star and tells you the truth of it. Perhaps reason is the bedrock, and here the ground gave way in earnest because a colder question came behind it. The senses were sure they were right, and reason overruled them. So what if reason, in its turn, is sure it is right, and there is some faculty above reason which we simply do not possess yet, that would overrule reason just as easily and show all our proofs to be as clumsy as the eye's guess about the size of a star? He had no way to rule it out. And then came the thought that finishes the job. When you dream, you believe completely in the world of the dream. Its impossibilities feel ordinary. You have no idea you are asleep until you wake and see that all of it was nothing. What if waking life is the same? What if this too is a kind of sleep, and there is a waking beyond it, death perhaps, in which you will look back on everything you are so certain of, now the way you look back at a dream over breakfast? Stand where he stood. You are the sharpest mind of your age. You have a proof for everything, and you have just found the one thing you cannot prove, that your own reason can be trusted at all, because any proof you might offer would have to be built out of the very reason that is in question. For roughly 2 months, by his own account, he lived like that, unable to stand anywhere, a thoroughgoing skeptic who could not honestly claim to know a single thing. How do you argue your way back from a place like that? The answer is that you cannot, and this is the part of the story that has unsettled clever people ever since. Al-Ghazali did not argue his way back. No proof saved him, no clinching logical stroke, because the whole trouble was that logic itself stood accused, and you cannot call the accused as his own witness. What happened, he says, was not an argument at all. After 2 months, the sickness simply lifted. Certainty returned to him, his trust in the plain first truths of reason came back. But it came back the way health returns to a sick man, from somewhere he could not see and had not earned. He put it in a single sentence worth hearing in his own words. He owed his deliverance, he wrote, not to a concatenation of proofs and arguments, but to the light which God cast into my heart. The churning stopped. The ground was under him again. He had not rebuilt it. It had been handed back to him quietly, from beyond the reach of anything he could argue. It would be dishonest to let that land as a triumph, because there is a hard objection here, and it deserves its full weight. A serious skeptic would say Al-Ghazali cheated and press 2 things. First, the total doubt was never coherent to begin with. To doubt everything you must reason, and reasoning is the thing you claim to doubt, so the man who announces that he can be sure of nothing is, in that very breath, sure of something. The whole 2-month collapse is a posture the mind cannot actually hold. And second, the rescue is worse than the disease. When you reach the wall, when reason cannot justify itself, saying that God sent a light into your heart is not an answer. It is a surrender dressed up as an arrival. What is that light when you look hard at it, but a feeling of being certain? And feelings of certainty are the cheapest thing there is. The fanatic at the stake has one, the madman has one. Everyone who was ever confidently, catastrophically wrong had one. To name your own feeling, a light from God, and go back to sleep is precisely what a person does when the reasons have run out and they cannot bear to keep looking. The charge is clean and sharp. He did not solve the problem. Blinked. And yet there is a reply, and it is not a small one, though Al-Ghazali only half says it. And it is a reply one badly wants to be true, which is exactly the kind of wanting to trust least. Turn the objection over. The rationalist insists you must rest your certainty on nothing but reason. But reason cannot certify itself, and that was the whole trap, and it does not dissolve just because we find it uncomfortable. Every proof stands on premises. Every premise leans on a prior one, and if you follow the chain down far enough, you arrive at a place where you simply trust. Trust that your mind, working as it should, touches something real, and you cannot prove that trust without already leaning on it. Which means the confident rationalist, at the very bottom, is standing on the same kind of ungrounded ground Al-Ghazali was. A bare faith that our faculties connect us to the world, held for no reason that isn't circular. Seen that way, his move is not a flight from honesty, but a rather brutal piece of it. The admission that the flaw beneath all our knowing was never itself a thing we knew, but something closer to a gift we did not give ourselves. Or maybe that is too kind, and he really did stop where stopping was convenient. What can be said for certain is that the pit he fell into is real, and that in 900 years no one has climbed all the way out of it. There is something fitting about meeting this particular question here, tonight, in the dark, because you are, at this very moment, drifting toward the one place where all of it stops mattering. Notice what is already happening to you. The sharp edges of the day are going soft. The certainties that felt so solid a few hours ago, the things you had to do, the things you were sure of, are loosening their hold one by one, and you are not fighting it. In a little while, the waking world will let go of you completely, and you will cross without the smallest effort into exactly the kind of dream Al-Ghazali could not tell from waking life. You do this every single night. It has never once harmed you. So let the question stay as unsolved as it is. You do not need to stand anywhere firm in order to fall asleep. The floor of the world is allowed to go thin. You are allowed to sink through it, gently, into rest. In the mountains of northern Persia, in Al-Ghazali's own lifetime, there was a fortress called Al-Amut, set on a rock so steep that no army could climb it, and inside it lived a man who had discovered a terrifying new kind of power. He commanded almost no soldiers. What he had instead were followers so completely given to him that they would walk, unarmed and calm, into the middle of a guarded court, kill whichever great man he had named, and make no attempt to escape, because to die in the act was to them not a price, but a reward. The Seljuk rulers, with all their armies, could not sleep easy. A vizier might be ringed by 100 guards and still be dead by nightfall. A knife slid between his ribs by a servant no one had thought to suspect. The man who first lifted Al-Ghazali to power, the great minister Nizam al-Mulk, died in exactly this way. And the sect behind those daggers, the movement that later ages would half remember through a fog of legend as the assassins, was not held together by money or fear. It was held together by an idea. That fearlessness was not madness. It was a doctrine followed all the way to its end. Human reason, they taught, is a broken instrument, untrustworthy, endlessly quarrelsome, unable on its own to reach any truth worth having about God or the soul. So you must stop leaning on it. Truth comes from one source only, a single, divinely protected teacher, an imam who cannot err, whose word does not need to be checked, because checking is precisely the faculty that fails. They were called the Batiniya, the people of the hidden meaning, who held that beneath the plain surface of Scripture lay a secret sense that only the infallible teacher could unlock. And the beating heart of the whole system was a single word: Talim, authoritative teaching. Find the true teacher, submit to him, receive certainty, stop wrestling and be told. Seen that way, the man walking serenely to his own death is the doctrine made flesh. Someone who has handed over his judgment so completely that he no longer needs to understand why he kills. The teacher has decided. That is enough. The movement was persuasive enough and dangerous enough that the caliph in Baghdad handed the task of refuting it to the ablest mind in the empire, and, in the very middle of his own collapse over what a person can know, Al-Ghazali sat down to write against the people who claimed to have already solved that exact problem. It is easy, from a safe distance, to hear all of this and see only fanatics with knives. But sit with the offer itself for a moment, stripped of the fortress and the murders, because the offer is one of the most tempting things a human being can be handed. Think of the last time you were genuinely lost, not on a road, but inside a decision too large for you, a diagnosis you couldn't read, a choice with no clear right answer. And then someone arrived who seemed entirely sure, someone who said with calm authority, "I know what this is, and I know what you should do." Do you remember the relief? Not the relief of understanding, because you still didn't understand, but the deeper, more animal relief of being allowed to set the whole weight down and let someone else carry it. That is what the teacher offered. Not an argument you had to follow, which might collapse, but a person you could simply trust, after which the exhausting labor of deciding for yourself was finally over. To a man who had just spent 2 months unable to be sure the floor was under his feet, You can see how a voice promising to end all doubt forever would sound less like a threat than like mercy. And their case was far stronger than we like to admit. Their central claim was not stupid, it was uncomfortable, which is a different thing. Look, they would say, at the whole history of unaided human thought. The finest minds who ever lived have reasoned about the deepest questions for 1,000 years and arrived at flat contradiction, this one proving the soul immortal, that one proving it dies, this one proving the world eternal, that one proving it made. If reason were a reliable road to the truth, all these brilliant travelers would have ended in the same place. They did not. They scattered. So the disagreement itself is the verdict. Reason cannot deliver certainty, and anyone who tells you to think for yourself is handing you a compass that spins. There is a real weariness under this, the kind anyone who has watched clever people argue will recognize. The sense that the debate will never close, that for every proof there waits a counterproof, that the whole enterprise is a wheel turning and arriving nowhere. Against that weariness, a final word from someone who simply knows is almost impossible to resist. And the sharpest part, the part Al-Ghazali could not wave away, was that he half agreed. He had just lived the failure of reason from the inside. He knew, better than his accusers did, that the mind cannot haul its own certainty up out of nothing. On the diagnosis, the men he had been ordered to destroy were partly right. Where they were wrong was in the cure, and his answer to them is quietly devastating. Grant the whole diagnosis, he said. Suppose you really do need an infallible teacher. You still have to find him, and there, at the very first step, the scheme falls apart. Many men in the world claim to be the true teacher or to speak for him. To pick the real one out from the frauds, you have to weigh their claims, judge the evidence, decide who is credible, which is to say, you must use the very reasoning they told you was worthless. The instant you choose your infallible guide, you have already leaned on the fallible faculty you were trying to escape. And it is worse than that, he pointed out, because their teacher was not even available. He sat hidden away in a fortress, unreachable, unable to answer the ordinary questions of ordinary believers about how to live. A guide who cannot be found or consulted is no guide at all. Even if you found him and somehow verified him, his teaching would still have to be understood, his words read, weighed, applied to your own particular life, and every one of those acts is your fallible mind at work once more. The teacher cannot do your understanding for you any more than he can do your breathing. Yes, Al-Ghazali agreed, human beings need authoritative teaching. He never imagined we could each spin the whole truth out of our own heads. But that teaching, he argued, had already been given openly to everyone in prophecy and the book it left behind, and accepting it did not require you to throw your reason into the fire. It asked you to use your reason and then to know where it ran out. Underneath the argument about which teacher to follow lay a deeper truth, one that reaches far past the quarrels of his century, and it is the thing worth carrying out of all this. You cannot, in the end, hand your judgment to anyone. It is not that you should not, it is that you cannot, because the act of handing it over is itself a judgment made by you with the very faculty you are trying to give away. Whom do you let decide for you? Notice how the question answers itself. Whoever it is, you are the one who decided to let them. Every authority you have ever submitted to, you first chose, and you go on choosing them day after day in 1,000 small acceptances you no longer even notice. The teacher who promises to lift the weight of thinking off your shoulders is promising something no human being can actually deliver, because the weight cannot be transferred. It can only be hidden from yourself. That is the danger folded inside the mercy. The peace the Batiniya offered was a real peace, but it was the peace of a man who has agreed never to look at his own hands, and Al-Ghazali, who wanted certainty more than almost anyone who has ever lived, would not buy it at that price. He refused the easiest exit from his crisis, the one that could have ended the pain in a single afternoon, and stayed out in the open with his questions still unanswered. That takes a kind of courage we don't often think to admire, the courage not to be rescued. But none of it is a weight for you to carry tonight. Whatever you have been unsure of lately, whoever you have been tempted to let settle it for you, all of that can keep. It will still be there in the morning, and you will meet it with a clearer head than you have now. You do not have to resolve a single thing to earn your sleep. No one has to be sure for you here. There is no teacher to find, no authority to submit to, nothing to be told. There was one more road he had not yet walked, the opposite of this one. Not the surrender of reason, but something nearer to its worship, taken up by men who trusted thinking so completely that they followed it straight off the edge of the faith itself. But that is a road for a waking mind, and yours is already going under. So let the questions keep their own counsel. Let yourself go quiet, and let the morning have whatever the morning wants. For hundreds of years, the scholars of Christian Europe revered a philosopher they called Al-Ghazali. Scholars in Paris and Toledo cited him with respect, set his book beside the works of the great Muslim thinkers, and taught his careful account of God and the soul and the cosmos as a model of how reason could map reality. There was only one trouble with this. Al-Ghazali, the Latin form of Al-Ghazali's name, had written that book for the single purpose of setting up its own destruction. What the Europeans were teaching as his philosophy was in fact his summary of other men's philosophy, laid out so fairly and so cleanly that, torn loose from what came after it, it read like a believer's own creed. They had mistaken the prosecutor for one of the accused. They were revering as a champion of the philosophers, the one man who had done more than anyone alive to take the philosophers apart. To see why he wrote it that way, you have to see the kind of opponent he had chosen. The philosophers, the Philosopher, were the heirs of the Greeks, of Aristotle above all, and their greatest mind, a Persian named Avicenna, had built something breathtaking. A single seamless system that claimed to prove, by reason alone, and with the hard certainty of geometry, the deepest truths there are. How the world flows from God, what the soul is, what becomes of you when you die. This is the thing that drew Al-Ghazali and enraged him at once. Here were men claiming exactly the certainty he had nearly lost his mind hunting for, and claiming it not about small matters, but about God and eternity. If their proofs held, a believer had no choice but to bow. So he did the honest and ruthless thing. He learned their system from the inside until he could state it more clearly than its own authors could. That book, the Maqasid al-Philosopher, Maqasid, the aims of the philosophers, was the one that would later fool Europe, and only then, having earned the right, did he write the attack. He called it the Tahafut al-Falasifa, Tahafut al-Falasifa, usually rendered the incoherence of the philosophers, though the word carries a rougher sense, the collapse, the falling apart, the moment a proud structure comes down. There were 20 places where he set out to bring the structure down, 20 arguments philosophers believed were solid and he believed were bluffs. On 17 of them, he charged them with grave error, with wandering into heresy, but allowed that a man might hold such views and still barely remain a Muslim. On 3, he went further. On 3, he said, the philosophers had not merely erred, they had walked clean out of the faith, and no honest word but unbelief would name what they had done. It is worth hearing what those 3 were, because each one, underneath the technical language, is a question you have asked in some form yourself, lying awake in the dark. Was the world made by someone on purpose, or has it simply always been here, running on forever, with no author and no beginning? Does God know you, specifically, your name, your face, this particular night, and the particular thing that is weighing on you tonight, or only humanity in the abstract, the general type, while you yourself slip beneath his notice? And when you die, is that the end of the body you have lived your whole life inside, forever? Or will you, the whole of you, somehow rise and stand again? Take the first of them, because the philosopher's case there is genuinely formidable and deserves to be felt at full weight. God, they said, is perfect and unchanging, common ground, something Al-Ghazali held as firmly as they did. But watch what follows from it. If the world had a beginning, then there was a moment when God, having not been creating, began to create. And what could make a changeless being suddenly act at one instant rather than another? Nothing outside him could move him, nothing inside a perfect being shifts. So even the idea of a God who starts creating at a certain point smuggles change and time into the being who is supposed to be beyond both. The only coherent picture, they argued, is a world that flows out of God eternally, the way light streams from the sun for as long as the sun exists, not made at a moment, but always, timelessly, pouring from its source. It is a beautiful argument, and it is hard to answer, and it ends in a universe that was never actually created at all. Their second claim cut closer to the bone, and it is the one worth sitting inside for a moment. God's knowledge, they reasoned, must be as perfect and unchanging as the rest of him. But the particular facts of the world change without stopping. You are awake, then asleep, alive, then dead. A thing is happening now, and then it is not. If God's knowledge tracked all of that, shifting as the facts shifted, then his mind would be changing constantly, and a changing God is an imperfect one. So the perfect God, they concluded, cannot know the passing particulars at all. He knows the great unchanging universals, the laws, the kinds, the types, but not the small moving facts, which means, if they were right, that the maker of 100 billion stars does not know your name, has never known it, and is not, at this moment, aware that you exist. Here is what Al-Ghazali did with arguments like these, and it is colder and more devastating than simply shouting them down. For the most part, he did not try to prove the opposite. He showed instead that the proofs were not proofs, that beneath the geometry-hard certainty lay soft assumptions the philosophers had never learned. The eternal God who cannot begin to act rests, he showed, on quietly treating God's will as though it were a falling rock, which cannot help acting the instant nothing blocks it. But a will is precisely the kind of thing that can choose one moment over another for no outside reason. That is what makes it a will, and not a mechanism. An eternal God could timelessly choose that the world begin at a particular point, and nothing in God need change. The philosophers had not disproved creation. They had assumed a God who could not choose, and then discovered, unsurprisingly, that such a God could not have chosen to create. The argument that God knows only universals failed the same way. It assumed, without proof, that God must know, as we know, his mind pushed around by its objects the way ours is, and strip out that one buried assumption, and there is no reason a perfect knower could not hold every particular, timelessly, in a single changeless act of knowing. Even the confident denial of the risen body was, in the end, only a confident denial. A power that could knot a body together once could knot it again, and no argument the philosophers owned could rule it out. Stand for a moment, he was standing. You are, by common consent, the sharpest mind of your century, and you have just shown that the men the whole world calls the masters of reason, the ones who claimed to have proved the very shape of reality, did not, on the three questions that matter most to a living human being, actually possess the proofs they said they had. Their certainty was a costume. Underneath it was faith, the same as everyone else's, only dressed in the robes of geometry and refusing to admit what it was wearing. There is a shadow over all of this that has to be named. Al-Ghazali did not stop at showing the philosophers wrong. On those 3 points, he pronounced them unbelievers, not mistaken Muslims, but men who had left the faith entirely. And in his world, that was not a word anyone used lightly. It was a word with teeth, one that in the wrong hands could be turned into real harm. Later readers would take that verdict and file it into a blade to use against anyone who thought too freely. It is fair to ask whether the man who prized honest inquiry so highly should have reached for so heavy a hammer, and fair to answer that he probably reached too far. A mind that has clawed its way out of doubt can hold its hard-won ground too fiercely, and yet look at what he was doing underneath the verdict, because it is stranger and finer than the verdict itself. He was not banning thought. He was outthinking the thinkers, using reason at the top of its powers to find the exact place where reason runs out of road and starts to bluff. He had drawn a border. On this side, he was saying, reason is king, and there he would meet any argument, point for point, and beat it. But past this line, on the beginning of things and the end of them, and whether you are known, no one holds a proof, not the philosophers, and if we are honest, not the theologians either. Which leaves a harder question hanging in the dark than any of the 3 he answered. How much of what any of us is most certain of about the things that matter most is knowledge, and how much is faith that has simply forgotten it is faith? Before you let all of this go for the night, keep one small warm thing that came out of the cold argument. The universe the philosophers described was a lonely place, a perfect, distant God sealed inside his own changeless thought, who kept the stars turning but did not, could not, know that you were down here at all. Al-Ghazali fought with everything he had for the other picture, a God who knows the particular, who knows the small moving facts, who knows the specific person lying in a specific dark room at the far end of a long night. You do not have to believe a word of it to feel the difference between the 2 silences, the empty one and the one in which you are known. There was, buried among his 20 arguments, one stranger and more corrosive than any of the 3 great charges, a quiet little knife aimed at the most ordinary thing in the world, at whether anything you call a cause ever really causes anything at all. For now, though, let that thought lie where it is. Unclench your jaw. Let your hands lie open. Whatever silence is around you tonight, let it be the second kind, the one that knows you are here, and let it carry you down. A flame comes close to a piece of cotton, and you already know what happens. The cotton darkens at the edge nearest the heat. A thread of smoke lifts. A small orange line races across the surface, and the white fibers curl and blacken and are gone. And where there was cotton, there is a little grey ash and a smell in the air. You have watched some version of this 1,000 times, and you know exactly what took place. The fire burned the cotton, but hold the moment still and look again at what your eyes actually reported to you. They saw a flame near some cotton. Then they saw cotton blacken. 2 things, one after the other. What they did not see, what no eye has ever seen, is the burning itself leaping out of the fire and into the cloth, the invisible thread of force that supposedly ties the first event to the second. You saw one thing, and then you saw another thing, and somewhere in the gap between them, without ever noticing you had done it, your mind slipped in a word that was never in the picture at all. Because this was Al-Ghazali's strangest and most dangerous argument, and he made it with a bluntness that still stops people cold. The connection, he wrote, between what is habitually believed to be a cause and what is habitually believed to be an effect is not necessary. We see 2 things keep company. We have never once seen the marriage that is supposed to bind them. And then he went past mere doubt, all the way to a claim that sounds close to mad the first time you meet it. The fire does not burn the cotton. The fire, he said, is lifeless, a thing with no will and no power, incapable of doing anything whatsoever. What burns the cotton in the instant the flame draws near is God, acting directly, the same way he acts in every event everywhere. The world is not a great machine of things shoving other things along. It is a sequence of separate acts, each one performed by God, following one another so faithfully and so without exception that we mistake the faithfulness for machinery and give it the name laws of nature. On the strongest form of the picture, the world does not even quietly coast along between those acts. It is closer to something continually recreated, moment after moment after moment, so that its steadiness from one instant to the next is not inertia at all, but a kind of fidelity, the same act, freely chosen again and again, and never once withdrawn. Sit for a second with how much of your life leans on the connection he just denied. Everything you did today, you did on the unspoken faith that causes cause. You pressed a switch and trusted the light would follow. You swallowed and trusted the thirst would ease. You set your foot on a floor you were sure would hold. Not once, in any of it, did you actually witness the link between the act and its result. You saw the pattern, you trusted the pattern, and you staked your life on it, as everyone always has. More than 6 centuries after Al-Ghazali, a Scottish philosopher named David Hume would notice exactly this and become famous for it, that we never observe necessity, only one thing reliably following another. But the difference between the two men is the whole difference between their worlds. Hume decided the necessity was a habit of our own minds, a story we cannot help telling, and left it there. Al-Ghazali decided the necessity was real, but that it lived in God and not in the fire, that behind the faithful pattern was neither a machine nor a mental trick, but a will holding all of it in place. And he had a reason to care that Hume never had. If fire burns of iron necessity, then the old story of the prophet thrown into the flames that would not touch him is a child's lie, and so is every miracle ever told. But if the burning is only God's steady custom, then the one who keeps the custom can, once in an age, and for reasons of his own, quietly set it aside. His strange argument was the room in which a miracle could happen. It did not take long for the counterattack, and it came from the greatest philosopher the Muslim world had left. The better part of a century later, in Spain, Ibn Rushd, whom Europe would call Averroes, wrote a patient, furious, line-by-line reply and gave it a title that answered Al-Ghazali's own with a dry smile. The incoherence of the incoherence. His charge was devastating, and it is the charge that rises up in anyone who loves the reliable, knowable world. To say that fire does not burn by its own nature, Averroes argued, to say that fire has no nature at all. And a thing with no nature is a thing with no definition, and once nothing has a definition, nothing whatever can be known. For what is knowledge, in the end, but the grasp of what things are and what they do? Pull the causes out of the world, and you pull the floor out from under every science, every craft, every scrap of understanding a human being has ever earned. The physician who knows that a certain herb heals, the builder who knows that a stone will bear weight, the child who learns that flame means pain, all of them, on Al-Ghazali's account, know nothing because the herb and the stone and the flame do nothing. It was as grave an accusation as one thinker can make of another, that in his zeal to guard the freedom of God, Al-Ghazali had made a world too slippery to hold a single certain thought, and had put a knife to the throat of reason itself. The accusation is powerful. It is also, if you look closely at what Al-Ghazali actually claimed, unfair. and seeing why is the quiet heart of this whole strange argument. He never said that fire might suddenly, at random, fail to burn. Just the opposite. God's custom, he insisted, is the most dependable thing in all of creation. The sun will rise, the stone will fall, the fire will burn, tomorrow and every ordinary day after. Without one exception, you will ever meet in a whole lifetime. He even had a name for it, the customary course of things, and he treated that custom as something close to a promise, the settled, gracious habit of a God who does not play tricks. The world runs on rails, steady enough to build a civilization on, and he built on them freely, keeping the philosophers' logic, their mathematics, their patient study of nature, and using reason as hard and as far as anyone of his age. All he had done was slide the thinnest possible blade between two words we keep glued together without noticing: reliable and necessary. The world is reliable. You can stake everything you own on it, and he did. But it is not necessary. It did not have to be this way. Nothing in pure logic forces it, and the one who set the pattern is not himself chained inside it. That is a smaller and a sharper claim than Averroes made it sound, and it leaves the knowable world entirely intact. But it puts a quiet question into your hands. For the next time you watch one thing follow another for the 1000th faithful time, what are you actually entitled to say that it must, or only that, so far, it always has? Look honestly, and you will find you cannot reach the must. You have only ever been handed the so far. Even your confidence that the sun will rise tomorrow is not a proof. It's a trust, held for no reason sturdier than that it has never yet failed you, which is the same crack Al-Ghazali had laid his finger on, the crack that runs, if you follow it all the way down, beneath everything anyone has ever claimed to know for certain. And here is the bitterness folded inside his triumph. He had just done some of the most brilliant thinking of his life, work that would be fought over for 1,000 years, and not one line of it had touched the thing that was quietly killing him. Look around the room you are lying in. It feels solid, doesn't it? Permanent. The walls where they were when you closed your eyes, the ceiling keeping its place in the dark. On the picture, he spent that whole argument defending the room is not coasting along under its own power. It is being held, this instant and every instant in existence, by something that has not paused or tired or looked away once since before you were born. You are not the one keeping it there. You never were. Whatever holds the walls standing and the floor beneath them, and your own slow breath moving in and out, was doing all of it long before you thought to worry about any of it, and will go on doing it long after you have let go into sleep. His arguments could not hold him. They never once healed the fear underneath, but it was held anyway, by something that asks for no argument at all. And so are you, right now, in this room, more surely than you know. So you can stop holding on. Let the walls be kept for you. Let the breath be breathed for you, and let yourself go. The fear that no argument could touch came for him, in the end, in the one place he had always been untouchable. He was standing before his students in the great hall in Baghdad, at the very height of everything a man could be, and he opened his mouth to teach, and could not. Words were simply gone. He tried again and again over days, and each time his tongue lay dead in his mouth. He told it plainly, years afterward, in his own words. God, he wrote, caused an impediment to chain my tongue and prevented me from lecturing, until my mouth became dumb. And then the strangest detail of all, the one that tells you this was no ordinary illness. The silence to which I was condemned cast me into a violent despair. His stomach closed against him. He could not swallow a morsel of bread or a drop of water. The physicians came and examined him and found a body with nothing wrong that any medicine of theirs could reach. The sickness, they told him, was not in the body at all. It was in the heart. By now you know what they, sitting at his bedside, could not have known. This was not an illness that had come from nowhere. It was the end of something that had been eating him for years. The slow, unbearable suspicion that the whole magnificent life he had built was a performance, that he was preaching a nearness to God he did not feel, that beneath the celebrated teacher stood a frightened man who had spent his gifts on his own glory and would one day answer for it. He had won every argument the world could put in front of him. He had taken apart the greatest philosophers who ever lived and beaten the masters of reason at their own game. And none of it, not one line of it, had reached the place where he was actually dying. The mind had triumphed everywhere. The man was still standing at the edge of the crumbling bank, and now his own body, no longer able to bear the split running through the middle of him, had simply refused to keep playing the part. It had not come on him all at once. For something close to 6 months, he had lived in a state of daily torment, and the torment took the exact shape of a man who cannot decide. In the morning, the truth would be plain to him. He had to leave, walk out of all of it, save his soul while there was still time. And by evening, the world would have its hands on him again. His children, his standing, the comfort he had earned, the sheer unthinkable size of what leaving would cost, and he would resolve to stay 1 more year. Day after day he swung between the two, resolving and unresolving, until he could no longer tell which of them was his true self and which was the temptation. Sit inside that for a moment, because you may know a smaller version of it. You have everything a person is supposed to want, and you find you cannot swallow a single mouthful of it, that it has all turned to ash in your hands, and still you cannot make yourself put it down because your hands have been holding it for so long that they no longer remember how to open. In the end, the decision he could not make was made for him. A will that cannot choose can be overruled by a body that will not go on, and when his tongue locked and the food stopped going down, the choice was quietly taken out of his hands. He could no longer teach. The performance was over, whether he willed it or not, and he came to see the breakdown not as a disaster, but as a mercy, as God reaching in and breaking by force a deadlock his own weakness could never have broken on its own. Once he understood it that way, the fear that had chained him loosened its grip. If staying was going to cost him his body first and his soul after, then the terrifying leap into nothing was, it turned out, the safer of the two roads. He resolved to leave, and this time the resolve held. But a man in his position could not simply announce that he was abandoning the most important teaching post in the Muslim world. The powerful men who leaned on him would have argued, pressured, forbidden it outright. And worse, he did not trust his own resolve to survive their arguing. So he did it by stealth. He let it be known that he was leaving on the pilgrimage to Mecca, a thing no one could object to, while telling almost no one that he had no intention of ever coming back to any of it. He took his wealth, and he had a great deal of it, and gave nearly all of it away, keeping back only enough to provide for his children and cover the bare needs of the road. And then, without the farewell his position would ordinarily have demanded, he walked out of Baghdad and out of the entire life he had spent 40 years building, and left it standing behind him like a house with all the lamps still lit. Ask yourself the question he had to answer with his whole body. What would you have to walk away from to save the part of you that cannot be saved any other way? Not what you would like to leave, what you would have to leave, and what it would cost you, and whether, when it finally came to it, you could open your hands. It would be easy, and it would be a lie to let this stand as pure heroism. There is a harder way to see it, and it deserves to be looked at without flinching. A man walked out on hundreds of students in the middle of their education. He left a family, provided for, yes, but left. He abandoned the duties of the highest office in his world and the community that had lifted him out of nothing and honored him beyond his dreams. And he did it in secret, behind a cover story, telling almost no one the truth. Strip away the language of holiness, and what you may be looking at is not a spiritual awakening at all, but a breakdown, a gifted, exhausted man cracking under a weight he could no longer hold and reaching afterward for the grandest words available to make his collapse look like a calling. There is a colder reading still. He left just as the political world that had sheltered him was coming apart, its patrons murdered, its succession drowning in blood, and a careful man might have read which way the wind was turning and dressed his flight up as a pilgrimage. That is probably not the truest account of him. His own telling is too pitilessly honest about his own weakness to be simple self-flattery, and whatever it was, it cost him everything he had, which is not usually what cowardice buys. But it cannot be ruled out, and he could probably never quite rule it out himself. It may be that the breakdown and the awakening were never two separate things, that this is simply what it looks like when a person is finally forced to become honest. Where he went, once he was free of it all, is its own kind of answer. He did not go anywhere important. The most famous scholar in the Muslim world went to Damascus and became nobody, a shabby, anonymous man in a patched robe who spent his days in the great mosque and climbed, the stories say, up into the solitude of its tower to be alone. He went on to Jerusalem and sat in the stillness of the dome of the rock. He went down to Hebron, to the tomb of Abraham, and there he made a vow that he would never again serve a ruler, never again take a ruler's money, never again stand up in public to win an argument for show. He walked to Mecca and to Medina and stood among the ordinary pilgrims at the ordinary rites, one more nameless face in an enormous crowd. And somewhere out on those roads, the whole meaning of the thing that had happened to him quietly turned over. The silence that had fallen across his tongue in Baghdad had been a horror, a punishment, the worst thing that had ever come to him. And now he was seeking silence out, walking into it on purpose, climbing towers to find it, choosing the empty mosque and the desert track and the long hours with no one to impress and nothing that needed saying. The affliction was becoming an aspiration. The very thing that had broken him was turning, slowly, into the thing he had left home to find. He had not walked away in order to learn something new. He had walked away because he had finally understood that everything he already knew was not the same as the one thing he did not yet have. You are close, right now, to a smaller and far gentler version of what he did. Every night, with no crisis forcing your hand, you perform a quiet little rehearsal of that same walking away. You set the whole day down, the things you meant to finish, the things you got wrong, the person you were working so hard to be, and you leave all of it standing behind you, lamps still lit, and you go somewhere it cannot follow. Notice that it has already started. The question of what you would have to give up, which felt so heavy only a few minutes ago, has begun to loosen and drift. You are not answering it now. You are simply letting it go. He had to be broken before he could put his life down. You only have to close your eyes. So let the day stay where it is. You do not have to carry it into the dark. Walk on without it, the way he did, out past the reach of everything you were holding, and rest. Say the word sweet to yourself. You know what it means. You could define it, use it in a sentence, explain to a child that honey has it and vinegar does not. Now imagine a spoonful of honey on your tongue. The distance between those two things, the word you knew a moment ago and the taste itself, is one of the most important distances there is, and almost no one stops to notice it. You did not learn a single new fact about honey when you tasted it. There is no property the taste gave you that the definition had withheld, and yet you now know honey in a way that a person who had read every word ever written about it and never once tasted it simply does not. The same gap opens under everything that matters. You can read every book ever written about grief and know nothing of grief until the morning it arrives at your own door. You can study love for a lifetime, its chemistry, its history, its poetry, and be handed more in 1 hour of the real thing than all of that ever give you. There is knowing about a thing, and there is tasting it. They are not the same, and the second cannot be reached through the first. This is the distinction that finally saved Al-Ghazali's life, and there is something humbling in how long it took him to find it, because it is so simple a child could feel it. Out on those roads, stripped of his fame and his title and his crowded halls, he came to understand that everything he had ever known, the law, the theology, the philosophy he had mastered and then demolished, the 10,000 things he could prove, was knowledge about. It was the definition of honey. And the thing that had been killing him, the nearness to God he preached so beautifully and could not feel, was never a fact he was missing. It was a taste he had never had. The Sufis, he discovered, had a word for it, dauk, which means plainly tasting. And they had understood, long before he stumbled his way toward it, that the deepest truths are not the kind of thing you can be told. He put it in an image no one forgets. A doctor can know everything about drunkenness, its causes, its symptoms, the exact chemistry of it, and stay perfectly, soberly ignorant of the one thing the falling down drunk in the corner knows completely, what it is actually like. The physician knows about drunkenness. The drunk man knows drunkenness. Both of them know. But one knows from the outside and one from within, and no amount of the first kind ever adds up to the second. His condition, when you sit with it, was a particular kind of hell, and it is worth feeling the shape of it. You can prove the existence of God in 4 different ways before breakfast. You can define the soul, name every virtue, out-argue any doubter alive. And you have never, not for one single moment, felt the thing that all of it is supposedly about. You know everything there is to know about water, down to its last hidden property. And you are lying in the desert with the word for it on your cracked lips, dying of thirst. That was the man who walked out of Baghdad, the world's greatest expert on a country he had never once set foot in. Seeing this turned his whole crisis inside out. For years he had assumed his sickness was a kind of ignorance, and that if he could only think hard enough, prove enough, master enough, he would finally reach the certainty and the peace he was starving for. That is why the philosophy had felt so urgent, and why its failure to heal him had left him so bewildered. But you cannot think your way into being changed. No proof has ever made a person humble. No argument has ever, all on its own, made anyone kind. These are not conclusions you reach. They are states you enter, tastes you undergo, and the only road runs through the living, the practice, the discipline, the slow remaking of what you actually are. This was the third road, the one that ran past both of the others he had tried and found wanting. The philosophers had said, "Reason your way to the truth, prove it, and it is yours." The men of the fortress had said, "Find the one who knows, submit, and it will be handed to you." The Sufis said something stranger and quieter than either of them. They said you cannot be told the truth, and you cannot be given it. You can only become the kind of person to whom it is finally obvious, and that becoming is the whole of the work. You already know in your own life that they were pointing at something real. Think of a thing you know completely and could not explain to save your life. The exact sound of a voice you love, the feeling of the town you grew up in, what it is like to be you and no one else in the world. You did not prove any of it. No one sat you down and told it to you. You tasted it, slowly, over years, until it became the furniture of your soul. That is the knowing they meant. and that is the knowing he had spent his brilliant, starving life without. But hold on here, because there is a real danger in all of this, and the sharpest minds have circled it for as long as anyone has spoken of tasting the truth. If the deepest knowledge is a taste, then it is, by its nature, something no one else can ever check. No one can climb inside your mouth to confirm that the honey is sweet to you. They can only take your word for it. And that is harmless enough with honey, but the mystic is making the very same move about God, about the meaning of a life, about what is finally real, and there the stakes are total, and the checking is impossible. The drunk man, remember, is also certain. He tastes a world that is warm and spinning and full of significance, and he is simply wrong about it. The fanatic tastes the rightness of his cause. The madman tastes a private universe that no one else can enter or correct. Every one of them would tell you, with shining eyes, that they know from the inside what you have only read about. And how, exactly, are you meant to tell them apart from the real thing? By their taste. But taste is the one thing that can never be inspected from outside. So the very move that promises a knowledge higher than proof may be the same move that seals you off forever from correction, the point past which you can no longer be argued out of anything at all, because you have set your certainty down in a room that has no door. Al-Ghazali understood that danger better than his critics did. He had, after all, just spent years learning not to trust his own certainties. And his answer was not to wave it away. It was to say that a taste, though it cannot be proved, can still be tested. Not by argument, but by what it does to the person who has it. A true tasting of the divine, he believed, leaves a mark you can actually look for. It makes a person humbler, gentler, more honest, less grasping, more able to carry other people's weight. A false one swells you up. It makes you cruel and certain and hungry for power over others. By their fruits, in other words, and not by their feelings. It is a real test, and it catches a great deal. But it is not airtight, and he was honest enough to feel the crack in it too. The fanatic, after all, is convinced that his hardness is holiness and his cruelty is love. In the end, there is no final proof from the outside that any inner light is the true one. What Al-Ghazali had come to believe was that this is simply the price of the deepest things, that anything worth knowing about God or the soul or how a person ought to live can only ever be tasted, and that the tasting will always cost you the safety of being able to prove that you were right. He made that trade with his eyes wide open. Whether he was wise to make it, or whether he had talked himself back into the very trap he escaped when he refused the fortress, there is honestly no telling. What is clear is that he was not naive about it. He walked in knowing there was no door, set all of it down now, the danger and the doubt along with it, and notice something you have been doing this whole time without a single argument. You know, right now, that you are tired. Not because anyone proved it to you, you have never in your life seen a proof of your own tiredness, but because you are tasting it from the inside, completely, the way you taste honey. You know the weight of your own body against the bed. You know the warmth of the blanket, the slow drift of your breath moving in and out, the particular heaviness spreading down through your arms and your legs. None of it is knowledge you reasoned your way to. All of it is knowledge you are simply having directly, with nothing in the way. This is the tasting he gave up everything to learn. The knowing that happens not in the head, but somewhere further in a place he would spend the rest of his life trying to keep clear. And you have had it, effortlessly, your whole life. It only ever needed the talking to stop. So let the talking stop. Let the last of the day's arguing go quiet. And taste, instead, this one plain thing that asks for no proof and no permission. How good it is, just now, to be this heavy and this warm and this close to sleep. In Al-Ghazali's world, a mirror was not a sheet of silvered glass. It was a disc of polished bronze, and bronze does not stay bright on its own. Left alone, it clouds, it films over, it dulls, it goes grey, until the face that should be looking back at you is only a smudge in the metal. To keep a mirror working, someone had to polish it and polish it again, scouring the tarnish away by hand, because the tarnish was always coming back. Hold that homely little object in your mind, the old metal mirror that needs constant cleaning to show you anything at all, because Al-Ghazali took it and set it at the very center of everything he came to believe about how a human being touches the truth. The heart, he said, is a mirror, and almost every heart, almost all of the time, is a mirror gone dull. By the heart, he did not mean the thing beating in your chest, and he did not quite mean what we mean when we talk about our feelings. He meant something deeper and stranger, the innermost faculty of a person, the kalb, the place where you actually perceive what is real, not with the eyes and not with the reasoning mind, but with something that sits underneath both of them. And his claim about it cut against everything his whole scholarly life had been built on. Truth, he had come to believe, is not merely a thing you acquire, the way he had acquired his thousands of pages of learning. It is something already reflected in you, the way a whole landscape is already there to be caught by any clean mirror you turn toward it. You do not have to put the truth into a clean heart. You only have to clean the heart, and the truth appears in it on its own. Which means the real obstacle to knowing was never, in the deepest matters, a shortage of information. It was the tarnish. It was everything filming over the surface, everything standing between you and the plain reflection of what is. He told a story to make the point, one of the loveliest things in all his writing. 2 teams of artists, he said, were set a contest. Each would decorate one wall of a great hall with a curtain hung between them so that neither could see what the other was doing. The first team painted. They ground their pigments and mixed their colors and covered their wall over many days with an image of extraordinary richness and detail. The second team did something that looked from the outside like nothing at all. They brought no paint. They took their wall, which happened to be a wall of metal, and they simply polished it, hour after hour, day after day, scouring and burnishing until it had become a perfect mirror. When the work was done and the curtain drawn back, the painted wall was magnificent. But on the second wall, the polished one, that same image blazed out even more beautifully than on the first, brighter, deeper, somehow alive, because the mirror was not holding any picture of its own. It was reflecting theirs, and reflecting it perfectly, because there was nothing left on its surface to get in the way. That, he said, is the difference between the scholar and the saint. The scholar paints. He acquires, he accumulates, he builds his picture of the truth stroke by careful stroke. The saint polishes, and in the end, the polished heart holds more than the painted one ever could, because it is not straining to manufacture an image of reality. It has simply gone clear enough to let reality show through. So what is the tarnish, and how do you get it off? The tarnish is everything in you that is not still. The endless wanting, the anger, the grasping after more, the fear, and beneath all of it, the sheer relentless noise of a mind that never once stops talking to itself. You know that noise. You carried it into the dark with you tonight, the conversation you keep rehearsing with someone who isn't here, the list waiting for tomorrow, the small grievance you keep picking up and turning over, the low static that runs on and on underneath everything. That is the film on the glass. That is why, most of the time, you cannot see much of anything clearly, not the world and least of all yourself. And the polishing is exactly what it sounds like: slow, patient, repetitive, unglamorous work. Al-Ghazali gave those wandering years over to it, long stretches of seclusion, of hunger and silence, of sitting alone in a bare room doing the one practice the Sufis trusted above all others, which they called dhikr, remembrance. the quiet, ceaseless repetition of the name of God, said over and over until the words themselves wear smooth and dissolve, and the talking mind finally, for a moment, goes quiet. It was not only the dramatic retreats either. He came to believe that the same polishing was hidden inside the plainest daily acts of the religious life, the ordinary prayers and fasts that most people performed by rote, that these, done rightly, were the cloth that cleaned the heart a little each day. It is dull, faithful labour, all of it, on a surface that will not come clean quickly and will not stay clean for long. But there is a hard question waiting at the bottom of all this quiet, and it would be a betrayal not to ask it. When the mind finally does go still, when the noise stops and the surface goes smooth, how do you know that anything at all is being reflected? A clean mirror in an empty room reflects nothing. It is just clean. And a mind emptied of its chatter is, perhaps, only a mind that has learned to stop. Pleasant, peaceful, blessedly quiet, but not for that reason in touch with anything beyond itself. This is the real danger folded into the polishing, and it is the exact opposite of the danger of the fanatic. The fanatic is too full. The quietist is too empty. He sits in his cell, scours his mind blank, and into the lovely stillness floats a warm sense of presence, of unity, of truth. And how much of that is God, and how much is simply what a human nervous system feels like when you finally give it nothing to do. Every tradition on earth has its contemplatives who polish themselves down into silence, and they come back with reports that flatly contradict one another about what they found there, which is exactly what you would expect if the thing they were all really touching was not some single reality on the far side of the glass, but only the pleasant blankness of their own stilled machinery. Purification can be self-hypnosis. A quiet mind is not the same as a true one, and from the inside, the two can feel identical. Al-Ghazali's answer to this is quieter than his critics and more honest than you might expect. He did not claim the peaceful feeling was the proof. He knew better than that. He said that a true polishing does not mainly comfort you. It disillusions you, in the plainest sense of that word. It strips away illusions, beginning with the flattering ones you hold about yourself. A false stillness, the self-hypnotic kind, leaves you feeling wonderful and entirely unchanged. A real one is far more uncomfortable because as the tarnish lifts, the first thing the clearing mirror shows you is your own face, honestly, without the softening haze, the pettiness you had hidden from yourself, the motives you had dressed up, the whole small machinery of self-deception the noise had been so useful for drowning out. You can tell the polishing is working, he thought, not when you feel serene, but when you begin seeing things you would rather not see and can no longer unsee them, which raises a question worth sitting with, if you dare. Would you actually want it? If the noise really fell silent and the surface really cleared, and the first thing it showed you was your own face with nothing softening it, would you welcome that? Or would you do what most of us do, and reach quickly for something to stir the water cloudy again because a dull mirror is so much easier to live in front of? It is a real test, and a good one. But in all honesty, it does not fully close the door either, because a mind can always tell itself a newer, subtler story about its own humility and call that clear sight. He was standing, in the end, where he always ended up standing on these questions. On ground he could not prove was solid, having decided with his whole life to trust it anyway. This was the silence he had gone looking for. It was never going to be the safe kind. Come back now to the room you are actually lying in. It is dark and it is quiet, and it is holding itself still around you, which is, when you think about it, the exact condition of a mirror about to show something. You do not have to make anything appear tonight. You do not have to polish anything, or reach anything, or see clear through to the far side of your own stillness. That was his work, and it was hard, and it cost him years. Your only task, right now, is the first and easiest step of it, to let the noise you brought in here settle, the way sediment settles out of still water until the surface of you goes smooth. Feel it already beginning. The rehearsed conversations are trailing off. The list is loosening its grip. The low static is fading down toward nothing. You are not forcing the quiet. You are only stopping the stirring and letting the water clear on its own. So let it clear. Let the surface go still and dark and smooth, and rest there on the near side of the mirror where nothing at all is asked of you but this. Stand at the back of a great mosque at the hour of prayer and watch 1,000 people move as one. They bow in the same instant. They touch their foreheads to the ground in the same instant. They rise together, murmuring the same ancient words their grandparents murmured, their grandparents before them. From the outside, it is a thing of real beauty, this synchronized devotion, every posture correct, every syllable in its place. And inside almost every one of those heads, the person is somewhere else entirely. One is running his shop's accounts. One is replaying an argument from that morning. One is worrying about a sick child. One is composing a message he means to send later. One is simply helplessly bored, counting the movements until he can leave. The bodies are all praying. The people, most of them, are not there at all. This was the thing Al-Ghazali came home to fix. When he finally emerged from his years of wandering and silence, he looked at the religion of his time and saw that it was not dying for any lack of religion. There was religion everywhere, mosques full, scholars arguing, the forms performed with flawless precision. It was dying of the opposite thing. It had become all form and no life. The learned men had turned faith into a technical science of the outside, a matter of exactly which acts were required, in exactly which manner, at exactly which times, valid or invalid, permitted or forbidden. And somewhere inside all that precision, the actual point of it, the remaking of the human heart, had quietly gone missing. So he sat down and wrote the enormous book that would become the monument of his life. The Ihya Ulum al-Din, Ihya Ulum ad-Din, the revival of the religious sciences. It ran to 40 volumes and reached into the whole of a life, how to pray and how to eat, how to earn a living and how to keep a friendship, the sicknesses that rot the soul and the virtues that heal it. And the word revival is the entire argument in a single breath. He was not inventing a new religion. He was trying to breathe the life back into the one already standing there, to marry the perfect empty forms to the inner life they had lost. His cure was not what you might expect from a man who had run away to become a mystic. He did not tell people to abandon the outer forms and go chasing the inner experience instead. He told them something much harder, that the two were never meant to be separated in the first place. Take the prayer again, the one those 1,000 distracted bodies were performing. The jurists had asked only whether it was done correctly, the right words, the right postures, the right direction, the right time, and if it was, they pronounced the duty discharged. Al-Ghazali agreed that all of that was necessary, and then said it was nowhere near enough. A prayer performed flawlessly by a body while the heart is off counting money, he wrote. A corpse, perfectly formed, correctly dressed, and dead. The point of the posture was to produce a presence. The bowing of the body was meant to be the outward shape of a real bowing within, a genuine attention, a quieting of everything else, the whole noisy self going still and turning at last toward what it claimed to be addressing. You already know the difference in your own life because you cross it a dozen times a day. You know what it is to say, "I love you," while thinking about something else. You know what it is to mumble a thank you do not feel, to sit through a meal or a conversation or a whole evening on autopilot, your body present and doing all the right things, and you yourself simply not in the room. That hollowness, spread across an entire religion, was what he had come back to heal. He was pressed hard from two directions at once, though, and both objections are strong, and honest people still make them. On one side stood the legalist, the man of the outer law, and his case ran like this: the acts are all we can actually see and share and teach. The law is public. It treats the king and the beggar exactly alike. Perform the required deeds and you have done your duty, whether you are a great mystic or a plain, tired shopkeeper who will never feel a flicker of anything. This heart business, by contrast, is private, unmeasurable, impossible to check and impossible to require. Build your religion on inner states, and you have built it on a rumor. And worse, you have handed the mystics a height to look down from, sniffing at the ordinary believer who merely prays, as though his honest, dutiful, unfelt worship counted for nothing. Keep religion in the deeds, where it is solid and fair and belongs to everyone. On the other side stood the mystic who had gone all the way, and his case cut in the opposite direction. If the whole purpose of the outer form is to reach the inner reality, then once you have actually reached it, the form has finished its work and can be set down. The rituals are a ladder to the roof, and no one, having climbed onto the roof, keeps hauling the ladder around on his back. To make the man who has really tasted God go on performing the same mechanical motions designed for beginners who have tasted nothing is to confuse the road with the place it leads. Free the arrived soul from the scaffolding it no longer needs. He would release neither of them, and the way he held them both at once is the heart of everything he built. To the legalist he said, "You are right that the acts are necessary, and wrong that they are sufficient. God does not want your empty postures. A gift handed over with contempt is an insult, not a gift, and a worship with no one home inside, it is worth precisely what the absence at its center is worth." But to the mystic who wanted to kick the ladder away, he was firmer still, and here he drew on everything his own dangerous years had taught him. The inner life without the outer law, he had seen with his own eyes, does not fly free. It comes loose, and a soul come loose will justify anything at all. The surest mark of a false inner state, he said, the clearest sign that a man has not risen above the law, but merely fallen out the bottom of it, is exactly that it makes him feel entitled to leave the law behind. The greatest souls ever lived, the prophets themselves, kept the forms most faithfully of all, not least. The law was never the beginner's ladder. It was the permanent channel the inner life had to run through to stay clean, and the permanent check that kept the heart's private certainties honest. There is something almost comic in the position he had backed himself into, and it is worth standing inside it for a moment. You are the most famous mystic in the world. You gave up the highest chair in the land, walked out on the entire apparatus of the law and the schools, and vanished for years to sit in bare rooms and scour your own heart. And now you have come home, to tell people to keep the law, to defend the same forms you fled. You, of all people, insisting that the shopkeeper's dutiful, half-asleep prayer is not to be sneered at, that the man who thinks his inner light has raised him above the rules is not enlightened at all. He is lost. Only someone who had gone all the way out to the far edge of the inner path and seen what was waiting past it would come back preaching the forms with that much conviction. The form without the life is a corpse. The life without the form is a ghost. Only the two together make a living thing, and the living heart he wanted kept present inside all those forms was, he knew better than anyone, no simple or innocent thing. It was crowded with sicknesses of its own, particular and stubborn, and he had given a whole quarter of his great book to naming them one by one, like a physician cataloguing the diseases of a body. You will meet all of this again in a few hours, whether you ever think of it in these terms or not. Morning is going to hand you a set of forms to move through: the getting up, the washing, the work, the small exchanges with the people you live among, and every one of them will arrive with the same quiet question folded inside it. Will you actually be there for it? Or will you let your body perform the day while you yourself go missing? That is his whole teaching, brought down out of the mosque and into an ordinary Tuesday. But it is not tonight's question, and you do not have to answer it now. Tonight, there is no form to keep, and no presence to summon, nothing to perform correctly, and no one you have to be there for. The one thing being asked of you at this hour is the easiest thing there is, to stop and to let go, and to be for a little while gloriously and blamelessly absent, until the morning comes round again with its forms and its question. Let it come when it comes. For now there's only the dark, and your slow breath, and no duty in the whole world but to rest. Something happened to you today that you have not told anyone about, and probably never will. Someone you know got a piece of good news, a success, a win, some particular thing you have quietly wanted for yourself. And in the half-second before you arranged your face into a smile and said the right words, something colder moved through you first. A small, ugly flinch. You did not choose it, and you are not proud of it, and you have spent the hours since then pretending, mostly to yourself, that it was never there at all. Or perhaps it went the other way. Someone slighted you, overlooked you, took a certain tone, and you have been carrying the little wound around ever since, taking it out at odd moments and turning it over, rehearsing what you should have said. These are such small things. They are also, Al-Ghazali would tell you, the exact places where a human life is quietly won or lost, and he understood them 900 years ago with a precision that can feel less like reading a medieval book and more like being read by one. He had appointed himself a physician, not of the body, but of the heart. It is worth pausing on how strange and how modern that idea was. The doctors of his day, like the ones who had once stood baffled at his own bedside, could examine a man and pronounce his body in perfect health, while the real sickness, the one that was actually killing him, lay somewhere their instruments could not reach. So Al-Ghazali set out to become the other kind of doctor, to chart the illnesses of the soul the way a physician charts the illnesses of the body, each one with its symptoms, its causes, its slow damage, and its cure. And the diseases he named are not quaint or dusty or safely locked in the past. They are the ones you have: pride, envy, the love of being admired, anger that runs the person instead of the person running the anger, the bottomless hunger of the appetites, and the strange, restless cruelty of the tongue, which does more harm in the world than almost anything else, and does it so casually that we barely notice we are the ones holding the knife. Take the one he understood best of all, because it was his own. He called it the love of status, the hunger to be thought well of, to matter in other people's eyes, to be admired. He saw that it ran deeper and clung harder than the love of money, and was far better at hiding. A man can give away his entire fortune and feel himself grow holy in the giving, and never once notice that he now craves more fiercely than he ever craved gold, the reputation of being a man who gives away fortunes. Al-Ghazali knew this one from the inside. It was the same thing that had driven him up the ladder in Baghdad and very nearly destroyed him at the top of it. He was just as unsparing about the tongue. He wrote page after page on the small violences of speech, the way we take another person apart in their absence and call it honesty, the way we fold a cruelty inside a joke so we can deny it later, the way a single careless sentence about someone can do damage that no apology ever fully undoes. And underneath all of it, he found the deepest trouble, the one that makes every other disease so hard to treat, the heart's endless genius for lying to itself. We almost never see our own faults as faults. We dress the envy up as a principled objection, the pride as healthy self-respect, the cowardice as patience, and we believe the disguise completely because we are the ones who sowed it. That flash of cold you felt this morning when your friend's good news landed, you have already by now explained it away into something more flattering. That is not a footnote to the disease. That's the disease doing the exact thing it does best, which is to keep you from ever quite catching it in the act. His picture of why all this happens is simple enough to hold even in a tired mind. Inside every person, he said, live two great animal powers. One is appetite, the pull toward food and comfort and pleasure and more, the hungry thing that wants. The other is anger, the drive to push back, to defend, to dominate, to win, the thing that bares its teeth. Neither of them is evil. You would not last a week without both. But they are meant to be governed, reined in and pointed by the seeing, reasoning part of you. And when instead they slip the reins and start doing the governing themselves, when the wanting or the rage quietly takes the wheel, the person is no longer really steering their own life. So the whole discipline he prescribed comes down to slowly, patiently taking the reins back. Not by force, and not by hating yourself into submission, but the way you would gentle a strong and frightened horse, with steady attention, small corrections, and an enormous amount of patience. At the center of it was a practice he thought every person should do, and almost no one does. The practice of his own long, quiet years, the real work he did on himself in the stillness after he walked away. He called for a daily accounting, a few honest minutes in which you sit with yourself the way a careful merchant sits down with his books at the close of business and simply look at what actually moved through your heart that day. You could try a small piece of it right now with the slight you are still carrying. Notice, first, that you are holding it. Notice that you have a real choice about it, that you can carry it on into tomorrow and feed it and let it slowly curdle. Or you can set it down, here, in the dark, and let it go. Watch yourself choose. That watching, he would say, is where a soul first begins to heal. There is a powerful modern objection to this whole enterprise, though, and it deserves to be put at full strength, because a great many thoughtful people now hold it. All of this, the diseases, the cures, the ceaseless watching of yourself for signs of pride and envy and appetite, is, they would say, simply shame wearing the robes of medicine. Look at what it actually asks of a person: to treat their ordinary human feelings as illnesses, to comb constantly through their own heart hunting for faults, to call their natural appetites diseases and their natural anger a sickness, and to live out their days as their own suspicious inquisitor. That is not a recipe for health. That is a recipe for a lifetime of low, grinding self-hatred, of never once being allowed to simply be a person. The whole of modern psychology, they would argue, has been a long and hard-won effort to free people from exactly this, from the internalized voice that whispers you are rotten at the root and must be endlessly monitored and corrected. Your envy is not a demon in your chest. It is a signal telling you something about what you want. Your anger is not a beast to be caged. It is information. Kindness toward yourself, acceptance of your own ordinary humanity, will carry you further and leave you far saner than 1,000 years of scouring your soul for sins. It is a serious charge, and anyone who has watched religious self-scrutiny curdle into misery knows there is truth in it. And yet the objection, even at full strength, misses something Al-Ghazali saw clearly, and it is worth rescuing, because this is one of the places he was simply right. He was not preaching self-hatred. He would have named self-hatred itself as one more disease, a kind of pride turned inside out, the ego still obsessed with itself even in its guilt. His aim was never to make you cringe, it was to make you free. Because the pride you refuse to look at does not go quietly away when you decide to accept it. It just goes on running your life from behind a curtain, choosing your friendships and your grudges and your ambitions without your ever once suspecting who was in charge. The envy you relabel as just a signal still quietly poisons every room you carry it into. There is a kind of self-acceptance that is really only a truce with the things that are steadily making you and the people around you miserable, a decision to stop looking dressed up as wisdom. What Al-Ghazali was actually asking for is harder than either the old harshness or the new comfort, to look at yourself with complete honesty and complete gentleness at the very same time, to see the envy plainly and not hate yourself for it. Now, is that always where his followers ended up? No. Self-scrutiny can absolutely rot into a morbid, anxious perfectionism, a fresh sickness worse than the ones it set out to hunt, and he was not always careful enough about that particular door. But the core of what he found is, in the end, one of the truest things anyone has ever said about being a person: that you cannot heal what you will not look at, and that you cannot bear to look at it for long unless you can also, somehow, be kind. For tonight, though, you can set all of it down, the diagnosis and the cure, the looking and the kindness both. Because sleep is about to do for you, freely and with no effort on your part, the very thing his whole difficult discipline was straining toward. Notice what is already happening to the slight you were carrying. It is getting lighter. The success that stung this morning matters a little less than it did an hour ago. The thing you should have said no longer seems worth saying. The whole hot, crowded press of the day's small wounds and wants is loosening its grip, one finger at a time, as you grow heavier. You are not fighting any of it. The tide of sleep is simply coming in, the way it comes in every single night, and lifting all of it gently off you and carrying it back out. So let it go out. Whatever you were still gripping when you lay down, you do not have to grip it now. The heart, it turns out, knows how to grow quiet on its own, if you will only stop stirring it, and it is growing quiet now. Let it, and rest. It is early morning in the town of Tus, the same dusty town where he had been born, the son of a wool spinner, and a man in a plain robe is awake before the light. This is the version of Al-Ghazali almost no one pictures, because it is the quiet one, and quiet does not make legends. He is not famous here. The people who know him only as a teacher who keeps a small school and a lodge for a handful of Sufi students. A man who prays, who writes through the long mornings, who seems to want nothing from anyone. This is the most powerful mind in the Muslim world, and he has arranged his whole life so that almost no one will ever notice him again. After the breakdown and the flight, after the years on the road, this is where he came to rest, home and out of sight. And finally, after everything, still, this was the thing. This bare, unremarkable, unwitnessed life was the treasure he had given up the highest chair in the world to find. We tend to imagine his lost decade as one long romantic wandering, robe flapping in a desert wind, but the truth is gentler and stranger than that. He travelled hard for a couple of years, and then he came home to Tus and simply stayed for years and years in a settled and ordinary quiet. And that quiet was the entire point. Remember where his story began, with a voice that stopped, a tongue locked in a crowded hall, a silence that fell on him like a punishment and nearly ended him. He had spent his whole life since then running from that silence, and then out on the road, learning slowly to walk toward it. Here in Tus, it had at last fully arrived, and it had changed its face completely. The thing that had once been the worst that ever happened to him had become the best. The silence that had been his affliction was now, at long last, his home. You can feel, even from here, how good it must have been. The endless performing was over. There was no room to win, no rival to demolish, no crowd whose eyes he needed on him, no sultan whose favour he had to keep. The hunger to be admired that had driven and tormented him for 40 years had finally loosened its grip, and in the space it left he could do the actual work, The writing that would become the monument of his life, the teaching of a few real students, the slow inner labor of becoming the person he had spent so long merely describing. And you know a little of what that peace feels like, because you have tasted it and lost it. Everyone has had a season or a week or even just an afternoon when the striving went quiet and you were simply unhurriedly alive. A holiday that softened you, a stretch of illness that stripped your calendar bare, some accidental stillness in which you remembered what you were like underneath all the wanting. And you know the other half of it too, how it never quite stays, how the world always, eventually, comes back for you. The world came back for him. After years of that hard-won peace, a message arrived that he could not easily refuse. A powerful minister, the son, as it happened, of the vizier who had first raised him to glory decades before, pressed him to return to public life, to take up the great chair at the college in Nishapur and teach openly again. And it was not only the minister. The times themselves seemed to be calling. The faith was in confusion. The teaching had grown thin and quarrelsome. Dangerous movements were pulling people away, and here was one man alive who might set it right. A whole century was turning over in the Muslim calendar, and there was an old belief that God sends, the turning of each century, a renewer to breathe the life back into religion. People began to say the word about him. A renewer, a mujaddid. So the choice came for the quiet man in Tus, and it is one of the cruelest a person can be handed. Everything you ever wanted, you have finally at enormous cost got. The peace is yours. And into that peace comes the message that you are needed, really needed, out there in the noise and the crowds and the compromise you bled to escape. And that the one person best able to help is you, and that there may be no one else. To stay is to keep your soul's single treasure and let the world go untended. To go is to hand that treasure back the very moment it is asked for. There is no clean way through it. Every road out of that room costs you something you cannot afford to lose. He went. In the year 1106, Al-Ghazali walked back into the world he had fled, took up a state-funded chair at a state-sponsored school, and began, once again, to teach in public. And the moment he did, he broke a solemn oath. Years before, at the tomb of Abraham, he had vowed that he would never again serve the political powers, never again teach at one of their schools. This was precisely that. There is no way to soften it, and the sharpest reading of his life does not even try. A cynic would say the whole thing is obvious. The disease was never cured. The hunger for status that had built him and nearly killed him had only gone quiet for a while, and the first time the world offered him back his greatness, dressed up as duty, he took it. And worse, this is the cruelest version, the man who had written more brilliantly than almost anyone alive about how the human heart disguises its vices as virtues, how we wrap our oldest cravings in the language of principle and believe the disguise completely, may simply have gone and done it to himself on the largest possible stage and never once caught himself in the act. That reading might be right. But there is another, and he spent the rest of his life living inside the argument between the two. In his own defense, he said that everything had changed. He was no longer the man who had made that vow. The vow had been made to protect a soul that was drowning, and the soul had since learned to swim. He did not want to go back. That was the whole point, and the proof, as he saw it, that his motive was finally clean. He was giving up the thing he loved most, not reaching for the thing he had once craved. And there is a real and difficult truth folded under his defense, one worth carrying out of his whole story, that clinging to your own hard-won peace while the world outside it suffers can itself be a kind of selfishness, a private comfort you have quietly decided to put above other people. Sometimes the higher thing really is to break the vow you made for your own safety and walk back into the fire for someone else's sake. That may be exactly what he did, It may be the finest thing he ever did. But here is the part that should keep you honest, and that kept him honest to the end. He could never be entirely sure. He, of all people, knew that the disguised craving and the genuine sacrifice can feel completely identical from the inside. That the very self-deception he had mapped so carefully is, by its own nature, invisible to the one being deceived. So the man who had spent his life learning to read the human heart arrived, at the last, at a question about his own heart he simply could not answer. He had walked back into the world, either as its servant or as his own oldest hunger wearing a saint's robe, and he did not know which, and he did it anyway. Let the argument rest there, unfinished, the way he had to leave it, and come back one more time to the plain fact of your own body in the dark. Here is the mercy in your situation tonight, and it is worth taking in. The peace he found cost him a breakdown, and a decade, and finally the giving up of the peace itself. Yours costs nothing. It is not a prize you have to win, or a vow you have to keep, or a treasure the world can come and take back from you in the morning. It is simply here already, freely given. The quiet of a dark room, the weight of your own settled body, the slow, easy tide of your breath. You do not have to deserve it, and you do not have to guard it, and no one is going to knock at the door and ask you to hand it over. So take the very thing he had to fight for and then surrender, the thing that is being placed in your hands for nothing at all. Let yourself be still. Let yourself be no one for a few hours the way he longed to be. There will be time enough later for whatever the world wants. There is nothing it wants from you now. When a man dies, he loses control of his own name. Al-Ghazali, in the 900 years since, became two completely different people, and neither of them is quite the man we have been sitting with. To one enormous crowd of readers stretching across the centuries and the whole of the Muslim world, he became something close to a saint, the proof of Islam, the renewer of the faith, the author of a book so beloved that it passed from hand to hand and generation to generation like a kind of second scripture worn soft at the edges by 1,000 years of use. And to another crowd, mostly modern, mostly looking back from a great distance, he became something else entirely, the villain who turned out the lights. The single man, in this telling, who took the most brilliant civilization on earth and broke it, who strangled science and reason in their cradle and sank the Islamic world in centuries of darkness. Same man, same books, two legends that could not stand further apart. And the strange thing is that the beautiful one is mostly true and the terrible one is mostly false, and almost everybody has only ever heard the false one. Take the true one first, because he earned it. The book was the Ihya, his great reconciliation of the outer law and the inner life, and it did exactly what he built it to do. It went out into the world and it revived things. It put the heart back into a religion that had been drying into rules, and it made the inner path respectable to the very scholars who had once been most suspicious of it. For 1,000 years, ordinary believers who never read a line of his philosophy have lived inside the world his Ihya made, praying with a little more presence, watching their own hearts with a little more honesty, because a man in Tus once insisted that the forms were meant to be inhabited. There is an old saying that if every book of Islam were lost but the Ihya, it would be enough to rebuild the whole of it. And his reach ran well past his own religion. Jewish philosophers argued with him. Christian theologians, including the greatest of the medieval West, quoted him respectfully as Al-Ghazali. On the one thing he cared about most, the healing of the split between the head and the heart, he did not merely win the argument. He shaped how something like a fifth of the human race would pray for the next millennium. Now the terrible legend, and it deserves to be laid out at full strength because it is a genuinely gripping story and a great many intelligent people believe it. Once, the telling goes, the Islamic world was the brightest place on earth. While Europe sat in mud and superstition, the cities of Islam blazed with learning, astronomers mapping the heavens, physicians centuries ahead of anyone else, mathematicians inventing whole new sciences, philosophers reasoning as boldly as the Greeks ever had. And then, the story says, it stopped. And the man who stopped it was Al-Ghazali. He wrote the book that branded philosophers unbelievers and made free thought a kind of heresy. He taught, with his fire and his cotton, that there are no reliable laws of nature at all, only the moment-to-moment whim of God. And if that is true, then why measure anything? Why expect the world to behave? Why bother doing science? A civilization that had been reaching for the stars, in this telling, listened to its most persuasive theologian, lost its nerve, closed the books, and sank into a long night it has never fully climbed out of, while the torch it dropped was picked up, a few centuries later, by a newly curious Europe. It is a powerful story. You have almost certainly heard some version of it, and as history, it is close to worthless. Because the science did not stop. That is the plain, stubborn fact the whole beautiful story runs aground on. In the centuries after Al-Ghazali, the very centuries he is supposed to have darkened, Muslim astronomers went on doing some of the finest work anywhere in the world, building models of the heavens so sophisticated that 300 years later, Copernicus would quietly borrow their mathematics to move the Earth. Medicine advanced, mathematics advanced, and philosophy, far from dying, kept right on going. A whole magnificent tradition of it flowered in the Persian world for another 500 years, wrestling with the exact questions Al-Ghazali had raised. He himself was no enemy of reason. He kept the logic and the mathematics and the study of nature, and only ever fenced off the one narrow patch of metaphysics where he thought the proofs had failed. The real decline, when it eventually came much later, and it came from the things that actually break civilizations: invasion, the burning of great libraries by Mongol armies, the slow strangling of trade and wealth, and not from one man's book about the philosophers. The scholars who study this for a living have been saying so patiently for decades, and still the myth goes around and around. If you have ever repeated some version of it, if you have ever said over dinner that religion killed the golden age of Islam, you were passing on a piece of folklore dressed up as history, and you are in enormous company. It is one of those facts that everybody knows, and that simply happens not to be true. There is a deep irony threaded through all of this, and it gathers around the one man who took Al-Ghazali's challenge most seriously. A philosopher named Ibn Rushd, the West would call him Averroes, sat down generations later and wrote a furious, meticulous, line-by-line rebuttal of the whole attack on philosophy, and titled it, with a scholar's cold wit, The Incoherence of the Incoherence. Feel your way into his position for a moment. You are at your desk in Spain, arguing point by point with a man who has been dead for decades, pouring your whole formidable mind into a defense of reason against a ghost. And here is where it turns strange. In his own civilization, Averroes did not really win. The future of Islamic thought flowed in other directions, toward the mystics and the Persian philosophers, and his kind of hard Aristotelian rationalism slowly faded from the center. But his books were carried west, translated into Latin, and there, in the Christian universities of the very Europe that would one day blame Al-Ghazali for killing reason, Averroes became a giant. He shaped how Europe read Aristotle, he fed the rationalism of the coming centuries, and he was studied so intently that they simply called him the commentator. So the philosopher who rose up to defend reason against Al-Ghazali ended up lighting his fire not in his own house, but in someone else's, across the sea. And the Europeans who warmed themselves at that fire grew up to accuse the loser of the debate of having put out all the lights. There is a lesson buried in there about how ideas actually travel. and it is not a tidy one. One more piece of his afterlife is worth setting straight, because the admirers get it as wrong as the accusers do, only in the opposite direction. You will sometimes hear that Al-Ghazali was the secret father of modern European philosophy, that Descartes stole his method of doubt and Hume stole his argument about cause and effect 5 and 6 centuries later. And the resemblances really are there, and they really are startling. His vertigo of total doubt, cured in the end by a light he could not command, does prefigure Descartes with an almost eerie precision. His argument that we never actually see one thing cause another does land, centuries early, on exactly the ground where Hume would one day stand. But there is almost no evidence that either the Frenchman or the Scot ever read a word of him, and honesty means admitting that a striking resemblance is not the same thing as a debt. What it probably means is something quieter, and in a way something larger. It means these things are not the private property of any one civilization at all, that the deepest puzzles about knowing and causing are simply there, waiting inside the structure of thought itself for any mind that pushes far enough into the dark. A brilliant man in 11th century Persia and a brilliant man in 17th century France who never met and never could have, walked out the same edge and looked down into the same abyss. That is not theft. That is what it looks like when the human mind, wherever it happens to be standing, reaches the end of the ground. Both legends, in the end, are ways of not seeing him. The saint is too clean, and the villain is too simple, and the real man is more interesting than either one, braver, more divided, more honest about his own confusion than any legend can ever afford to be. That is what tends to happen to great minds once they die. The world flattens them into cartoons, a hero to admire or a villain to blame, because a cartoon is so much easier to carry around than a person. And the last irony, the one worth taking with you towards sleep, is this. All that noise, the centuries of praise and blame, the arguments still going on tonight in seminar rooms and comment threads and books written about him, all of it roars around a man who spent the back half of his life trying, more than anything else, to be quiet. The debate will still be going in the morning, and it does not need you to settle it, and it will not miss you for a few hours. So let it recede. Let the loud, unanswerable question of who he really was drift off to keep the other unanswered questions company, out there in the dark. The room around you is quiet. He would have liked it here. And for now, so can you. No verdict to reach, no legend to believe, nothing at all to defend. Only the quiet he was always walking toward, arriving without any effort in you. There is one morning left to tell you about, and it is the quietest of them all. It came on a winter's day in the year 1111 in the town of Tus, the same dusty place at the eastern edge of the Persian world where he had been born the son of a woolsmith more than half a century before. He had come home for good by then. The great return to the lecture halls was behind him. The fame, the arguments, the whole roaring public life had been set down at last, and he was living out his final years the way he had always most wanted to live, quietly among a few students, in a small lodge, out of sight. He was in his mid-50s. He was dying, and it seems he knew it. And what the tradition remembers of that last morning is simple and quiet. He woke early, before the light, the way he had woken for years. He washed himself carefully with cold water in the cold dark, the way a man washes before prayer. He prayed the dawn prayer, and then he asked the people with him to bring him his shroud, the plain white cloth that his body would be wrapped in for burial. And when they brought it to him, he took it in his hands and kissed it, and laid it gently against his eyes, and said softly that he entered obediently into the presence of the king. Then he stretched himself out full length and turned his face toward Mecca, and by the time the sun was properly up, he was gone. There is even a poem the tradition puts in his mouth, meant for the people who would weep over his body, in which he tells them not to grieve for the thing in the grave, because that was never really him. He was the bird, the poem says, and the body was only the cage, and the bird has flown. Whether it all happened in exactly that way, no one can be certain, but it is how those who loved him wanted him remembered, not struggling and not afraid, but folding himself up quietly and lying down, as though death were only one more thing to be met with attention and without noise. And there is something almost unbearably right about the quiet of it. Because if you have stayed with this whole long life, you will remember how the real turn of it began all those years before, with silence of an entirely different kind. A man at the summit of the world, standing in a crowded hall, opening his mouth to teach and finding that nothing would come out. A tongue locked, a voice taken from him, a silence that fell like a sentence and very nearly killed him. That is where everything started to come apart, with silence as the worst thing that had ever happened to him, an affliction, a punishment, a terror in a crowded room. And here, at the very end, is silence once more. But it has changed its whole nature. It is not being done to him anymore. He is the one choosing it now, lying down into it, folding himself into it the way you fold into a bed you have been longing for all day. The thing he ran from, screaming, at the beginning is the thing he lies down into, at peace at the end. The whole journey, when you stand back far enough to see its shape, was really just the long distance between those two silences, the one that was forced on him and the one that was, finally, welcomed. Look at the shape of it, this once, the whole of it, at a glance, because it is one of the most complete human lives anyone has ever left a record of. A hungry, gifted, fatherless boy climbs out of a wool shop and up every ladder the world has to offer until he is the most celebrated mind in his civilization, and discovers at the top that he has fed everything except the part of him that was actually starving. He turns his ferocious intelligence on the question of what he can really know, and the floor drops out from under him. He doubts his way into an abyss no argument can climb out of, and is saved, in the end, not by a proof, but by a light he cannot command. He masters the greatest philosophy of his age and takes it apart with his bare hands, and then uses the same reason to find the wall at the edge of reason and climbs over it. He breaks and runs and gives away everything, and spends years in bare rooms learning to be quiet, learning to taste what the books could never hand him, learning to scour his own heart like a clouded mirror. He builds, out of all of it, a way of being religious that keeps the head and the heart together, and it will shape how a fifth of the world prays for 1,000 years. And then, having found his peace, he gives even that away and walks back into the noise for other people's sake, unable to the end to be quite sure whether that was his finest act or his oldest weakness in disguise. It is all there. The whole range of what a person can be, the ambition and the doubt and the brilliance and the breakdown and the honesty and the confusion, gathered up into one restless, searching, unusually truthful life. And it would be a lie on this last night to tie it all up in a bow and tell you he had found the answer. He had not, and he knew he had not, and the honesty about that is the finest thing in him. He took reason as far as a human being has ever taken it, used it to humble the masters, used it to map the outer wall of thought itself, the border past which no argument can carry you. And then, having reached that wall, he did not turn back. He went over it, into the tasting and the polished heart, and the light, he said, had been cast into his breast, into a certainty that arrives not as the end of an argument, but as a kind of grace you can neither summon nor prove. The question that has hung over him for 900 years, the one no one has ever quite been able to close, is whether that was the bravest and most honest thing a mind can do, or whether it was the moment his great mind finally gave up. The question turns you back and forth the longer you sit with him. The honest thing to admit is this: there is no telling which it is, and that this, in the end, is not a failure, but the whole point. Here is what keeps the question open, and it is the same trap he fell into as a young man doubting everything in the dark. Reason cannot get underneath itself. It cannot prove its own foundations without already standing on them. So, at the very bottom, everyone, the coldest scientist and the wildest mystic alike, is finally trusting something they never arrived at by proof, that their own mind touches something real. Al-Ghazali saw that bottom more clearly than almost anyone who has ever lived, and when he reached it, he refused to pretend the ground was solid when it was not. He said, in effect, the floor beneath all our knowing was never itself a thing we knew. It is closer to a gift or a trust or a light, and he would lean his entire weight on it, eyes wide open, knowing he could not prove that it would hold. Maybe that is surrender. Maybe it is the most honest thing a person can do, once they have seen how little any of us can actually prove. There is genuinely no knowing. What can be said is that the question has stayed alive for 9 centuries precisely because it has no clean answer, because it sits on the exact edge where the reach of the mind runs out, and every one of us, the believer and the doubter both, is standing on that same edge tonight, whether we have ever noticed it or not. And that is the thing to leave you with, as you grow heavier and the room goes soft around you. Not an answer, but the strange, steady comfort of a question that even the greatest of minds could not close. There is a kind of company in it. You are not failing to solve something that everyone else has solved. You are standing where the wisest people who ever lived also stood, at the end of the ground, and finding, as they found, that the last step is not a proof, but a letting go. Because notice where you are right now. You are doing, in miniature and with no fear at all, the very thing he did at the end. All day you have been holding things, problems, plans, the weight of who you are trying to be, the whole tireless apparatus of the waking mind keeping its grip on a world it can never fully understand or control. And now, slowly, you are setting all of it down. You are not solving anything. You are not proving anything. You are simply loosening your hold, one finger at a time, and trusting, without a shred of proof, the way you trust it every single night of your life, that if you let go, something will hold you. That is the whole of it. That is what he learned at enormous cost, and what your own body already knows how to do for nothing every night at exactly this hour. The letting go he had to be broken to reach, you are doing gently on your own right now. So let it happen. There is nothing left to do tonight and nothing left to decide except the one small, easy thing that is already half done: to stop holding on. Feel how the questions that seemed so urgent an hour ago have already begun to loosen and drift away. His questions, your questions, the great ones about what is true and what it all means, and whether any of it can ever really be known. You do not have to answer a single one of them to fall asleep. They will keep. They have kept for 900 years. They will keep until morning. Let the big ones go first, the ones about meaning and certainty and God, and notice how easily they float off once you stop gripping them. Then let the small ones go, the ones about tomorrow, the undone tasks, the thing you wish you had said. Let your thoughts come slower now, and further apart, and quieter, like footsteps walking away from you down a long hall. There is no argument to win here. There is no mirror left to polish. There is nothing at all being asked of you except to be here, breathing, growing heavier on the near side of sleep. Your breathing has already changed. You did not tell it to. It slowed on its own, the way it always does when the day finally loosens its hold on you. Somewhere in your body, the long day is ending. Muscle by muscle, the small tensions you have carried since morning quietly letting go now that no one is watching and nothing more is required of you. The room is dark and still all around you. Al-Ghazali would have known this exact quiet. It is the very thing he walked away from everything to find, the still surface, the mind gone smooth, the whole restless machinery at last coming to rest. He spent decades and a breakdown and the giving up of his own hard-won peace to reach it. It is being handed to you now for nothing at all, in the ordinary dark, at the close of an ordinary day. You have only to receive it. You have only to let yourself go down. So let go. You are safe, and it is late, and you have done more than enough today. There is nothing left in your hands that you need to keep holding. Whatever was heavy, set it down. Whatever is unfinished, let it wait for you. Whatever could not be answered, let it stay unanswered, gently, in the dark, where it cannot do you the slightest harm. The great questions will still be here in the morning, or they will not, and either way, they can wait. You do not have to carry any of it one step further tonight. Let your thoughts go quiet. Let your body grow heavy. Let the last faint light behind your eyes fade all the way down. He lay down at the very end, without fear, and folded himself into the quiet he had spent his entire life learning to trust. Now it is your turn to lie down into yours. There is nothing to solve and nothing to fear and nowhere else you need to be. Rest now. You are already almost there. Sleep well.